Who is the heroine of Matagorda? And why doesn't Glasgow have enough statues to form a Spice Girls tribute act? Find out now on this episode of Astonishing Glasgow. It's March 6th, 2022, and it's a lovely sunny day in Glasgow. Freezing cold, but it's sunny. In honour of International Women's Day, I thought I'd go in search of one of Glasgow's true war heroes, who was tragically forgotten about even in her own lifetime. My first stop today is in the Gorbals area of the city, and Glasgow's southern Necropolis, or City of the Dead. I do love a good wander around a cemetery. Is that weird? The southern Necropolis was opened in 1840 to serve the residents of the Gorbals and surrounding areas, and it's the final resting place for over 250,000 bodies. Among its more famous residents are Sir Thomas Lipton, the tea merchant, George Roberts, a recipient of the Victoria Cross, and Alexander Greek Thompson, one of Glasgow's most famous architects. The grave I've come to find today is in the furthest corner of the eastern part of the graveyard. This unassuming grave is that of James Reston and his wife Agnes Harkins, the heroine of Matagorda. She gained this title in 1810 when she accompanied her husband Sergeant James Reston to Spain during the Napoleonic Wars. She was stationed in the small fort of Matagorda near Cadiz with James and their 4-year-old son when the fort was bombarded by French forces. Without thought for herself, she got her son to safety and began tearing up linen as bandages and then assisting the surgeon with the increasing numbers of wounded men. When water ran short, a young drummer boy was instructed to go to the well and fill a bucket, but rigid with fear, he lingered by the doorway. Mrs. Reston was heard to say, "The poor thing's frightened and no wonder at it. Give it to me and I'll go for it." Through the melee, she made for the well, but while recovering the bucket, the rope was cut by a shot. This didn't stop her, as she retrieved the bucket, filled it with water, and returned to the safety of the bomb-proof infirmary to continue nursing the wounded soldiers. She was also seen carrying sandbags, ammunition, and food and wine to the gunners. She refused to leave even when the other women in the battery were taken to safety and continued to nurse the wounded until the following day when the French forces withdrew. After the war, it was suggested she should apply for financial support, but the Secretary of State for War judged that there were no funds available. By 1844, the now widowed Mrs. Reston was reduced to pauperism and was living in the town's hospital in Glasgow after moving from the lunatic asylum. Now 74, she earned her keep as a sick nurse. A committee of officers were shocked to hear about the plight of what they called a truly valiant and deserving, though sadly neglected woman. They launched an appeal to provide her support, with donations coming from both the military and royalty, with Queen Victoria herself offering support. The collection secured Mrs. Reston a whole £30 per year. She was now independent, but preferred to remain in the hospital and pay for her board. She set aside just enough money for her funeral and donated the rest to charity. She died on Christmas Eve 1856 at the age of 85 and was buried right here beside her husband. William McGonagall wrote the poem A Humble Heroine about Agnes Reston, but it's fair to say that she deserves a more permanent memorial or even a statue. And this brings me to the next part of this video. Did you know that there are only 4 statues in Glasgow dedicated to women? And do you know where they are? Well, stay tuned, and by the end of this video, you'll know all about it. From the Gorbals, I'm going to follow the River Clyde towards the city centre, and the first female statue we're going to visit, it's right here, beside Customs House. This statue was erected in 1974 to commemorate the 2,100 British volunteers of the International Brigade who joined Republican forces in Spain to fight General Franco's regime. The figure at the top was inspired by Dolores Ibárruri, the Spanish politician and leader of Spain's Communist Party who led the fight against fascism during the Spanish Civil War. The statue was to be cast in bronze, but due to the cost, it is instead made from a steel skeleton covered in fiberglass. Known as La Passionara, it stands today over the banks of the River Clyde. On to the next statue, and it's the most recent, being installed in 2011. 2.5 miles down the river to Govan Cross, and outside Govan subway station, stands Mary Barber. Mary Barber was born in 1875 and cemented her place in history by leading the women of Govan in the rent strikes of 1915. She was an activist and politician throughout her life and regularly fought for the rights of women and children. The rent strikes were sparked when property owners believed that demand outstripped supply as workers flocked to shipyards during World War I. With many men away fighting in the front or in prisoner of war camps, the property owners believed the women at home to be a soft touch. They didn't count on Mary Barber, and in protest at rent hikes and poor maintenance, the rent strikes began. By 1915, 20,000 tenants were refusing to pay, and within a month, Parliament passed the Rent Restrictions Act, which was the first of its kind in Europe, and capped the rent at the pre-war rate. Now we stay in Govan for our next woman to be honoured in bronze, even if the statue uses her husband's name on the plinth rather than Lady Isabella Elder. Lady Elder, born in 1828, was married to John Elder, who was a marine engine builder. By the time John Elder died in 1869, John Elder & Co. was regarded as one of the world's leading shipbuilders. After his death, Lady Isabella Elder became the sole owner of the company and ran it successfully for 9 months before transferring it to her brother. With no children, she toured the continent and became a major philanthropist in her home city of Glasgow. She donated to universities and colleges, provided financial support to women to study medicine, and purchased lands for the park that her statue now stands in, Elder Park in Govan, named in honour of her father-in-law, David Elder. She passed away in 1905, and this statue was unveiled in 1906. We're nearly there now, and it should come as no surprise who the subject of our last statue is. Back into the centre of Glasgow and in George Square stands the statue of Queen Victoria on horseback. Unveiled in 1854 to commemorate the Queen's visit to Glasgow 5 years earlier, it was sculpted by the same artist Carlo Marochetti who created the statue of the Duke of Wellington just a short distance away. There's more about that statue if you follow the link at the end of this episode. It was said that Marochetti was commissioned to sculpt this statue after the Queen was said to have briefly remarked that she liked the Duke of Wellington statue during her visit. The statue of Queen Victoria holds the distinction of being Britain's very first statue featuring a woman on horseback, and it drew huge crowds when it was unveiled, but it wasn't unveiled here. It was originally sited at the corner of Buchanan Street and St Vincent Place diagonally across the junction from what is now the Apple Store and above the abandoned public toilets. It is sad to think that only 2 years after the Queen got her statue, Agnes Reston would die almost penniless and forgotten after all she did for the injured soldiers of Matagorda. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please hit that like and subscribe button and share it with your friends. And a big thank you to Roger Edwards, who got in touch to send loads of information about Agnes Reston. I will post a link to his Flickr page in the description. And if you want to get in touch, use the comments or my social media feeds with the links below. I'm off now for a can of carbonated orange liquid and a yum yum, but stick around for links to more of my videos, and I'll see you next time in Astonishing Glasgow.